That's what we're here to talk about with respect to network mapping, network documentation, how you might go about doing that with a tool like, well, NetTerrain. There's other products out there, of course, do network discovery and other things. And some of those might be maybe appropriate fit for what you're doing, or maybe it's a tool like ours. But we'll certainly talk about this a little bit and see kind of what the fit is and what you're looking for. I think really anytime you get into a project, specifically network documentation, you're always trying to answer the question of kind of what that means to me and what I'm really trying to do. Normally it's you have some issue and you're trying to resolve that issue. That issue might be something like troubleshooting. I'm just trying to reduce downtime, or I'm trying to understand if something gets cut in my network, what's going to be impacted. Or it might be as simple as, I don't know what I have. I need to do some sort of discovery and understand where things are and how they're connected and that type of thing. And there's different types of drawings you might do too. You got physical drawings and your, of course, logical type drawings. Physical being more, I might want to go down to the port level. Logical might be, I just want a big flat drawing showing how things are connected together, that sort of thing. So certainly you do have different ways of doing documentation, and or different views you might want to create or take when you are looking at doing network documentation. So it's going to mean different things to different people. A lot of times we do get questions of how do we automate network documentation, sort of what's the most appropriate way of doing that. And that in itself can have certainly different outcomes too when you are getting network documentation. So I'm going to go through a few slides and I'll get into kind of showing our tool a little bit. And if there's questions and things like that, we're happy to touch base on those. I have a couple of polling things to get into as well. So, troubleshooting, unnecessary downtime, wasted money. I mean, this all kind of speaks back to why you might do documentation. I mean, sometimes the answer to network documentation is, I'm not going to do it, because again, network documentation is not something you necessarily do unless there's a good reason behind it. Now, I will say, and I'm probably a little biased, my opinion is I would find it very hard to manage a network properly and do certain things, planning and not just, add change planning, capacity planning, but other types of planning around network projects and things like that without good documentation. So I think it's important. But again, if you've been sort of living without it, maybe, you definitely want to have a good reason for why you might be doing it. But so I got a quick polling question. And actually I think I changed the polling question a little bit, but, let me post this one. Let me launch this. I actually want to know about, how you're documenting your network today. What is sort of your approach today as to how you're doing things, and you got different responses. I got a few coming in here: spreadsheets, Visio, none. It's all in my head, both, or something else. So some of you might have a tool already. So I'll give this a minute to finish out. Okay, so I think I need to, well, let me just talk about the results of the poll. So most people were sort of a split between Visio and the spreadsheets. Some did both, smaller percentage was both. And then we had something else was, I guess the sort of the top number 4, and then they got none. About 10% were none. So that's pretty common. I mean, Visio is the big, sort of the one in use by many people, and the one that sort of the one that probably people use the most. That and spreadsheets, I would say. So let me close the poll, and so you should see my screen again. And again, the thing with spreadsheets and Visio is that they can be very good tools, especially if you have a good process around them. They are limited. I mean, they're not really kind of built for network documentation. I mean, Visio to a certain extent is, but it's really Visio's more of a drawing tool. Spreadsheets, not visual, where people are visual. They want to kind of see things. It gives them a better understanding of information versus spreadsheets, which are great for, accounting and things like that, but not necessarily network documentation. Although, some people would make it work really well. And ultimately what you're trying to do is hopefully get into more of an automated system where you're trying to collect data and bring it into a tool that network documentation tool that can display and give you information. So, but something that drives this, what's driving the need to update a Visio drawing or a spreadsheet? Well, there's different things. One might be you have a problem of just not knowing what you have, what it's connected to. Right? I mean, when you go to troubleshoot something, if the documentation is good, then you're effectively documenting it at the time when you're having an outage, which is really a pretty tough time because you're already under the stress of the boss or your customers or whoever sort of being upset and breathing down your neck to get something fixed quickly. And then all of a sudden, now I have to also document my network to help me figure out what's wrong and troubleshoot. So that's really kind of a poor time to make that happen. So hopefully you've got things documented in place to help you with some of these problems and issues that you might run into. So when you don't know exactly what you have and where it is, right? And that something else that I've sort of experienced with customers and people looking at documentation tools is not knowing what you have or thinking you know what you have can be an issue too, because if you think you have something in the right place and it's where it's rack mounted, let's say, and how it's physically connected, and you have a person that you need to send out into the field, that can spend a lot of time maybe having to get there or walk there, whatever it is, depending on your environment, if it's campus or just geographically dispersed. You may send somebody out, or maybe you're hiring a contractor to go out, and then all of a sudden they get there and things are not correct. So that's a big waste of time and money right there. So you look at all those things and go, okay, well, if my problem is enough, maybe I do need a better documentation solution, and hopefully you get some of the automation and discovery. So you guys can, we have some case studies and stuff you guys can, I might have had my polling questions backwards in my sheet, so I apologize for that. But the other polling question we had is, I'm going to launch this one, so just assume I reverse these. Why do you want to put a documentation in place or an automated documentation system in place? So if you guys can respond to that. And I think the options were faster troubleshooting, capacity planning, reduced costs for equipment, and other. And the reduced costs for equipment, I think that kind of just spoke to not knowing what you have and making sure you're not buying stuff that you might already have in the field. I've run into some folks that are like, yeah, we kind of been buying stuff we didn't necessarily need to buy because they just didn't know they had it or where it was or that type of thing. So I think troubleshooting always seems to be kind of a big thing. So I think troubleshooting seems to be number one, and then closely followed by looks like capacity planning, and then reducing costs of equipment, and then 10% other. So everybody has the reason. I'm going to close that poll and get out of this PowerPoint thing. So let me kill PowerPoint. I'm not very good at it. I paused my screen, so if you see a weird screen or something, give me 1 second. I'm just trying to get my screens lined up. Not very good with the dual screen thing either. All right, so let me hit my show screen, and I think we're back in business here. Yep. Looks like I'm back in. So what I have on my screen now, you should see, is NetTerrain. NetTerrain is our software we manufacture for doing network documentation. And again, different types of network documentation. You might be doing DCIM, you might be doing outside plant, you might be doing logical. And those are all things you can do in our tool. So our tool is a hierarchical tool, can kind of drill down and get into different levels and layers, that kind of thing. And it's basically you're getting objects from a catalog and you're bringing them in and you're starting to build relationships between things. And what I mean by that is it might be relationships like, hey, I've got a building. I want to show the things inside the building: floors, rooms, racks, wiring closets, and so on. I mean, those are all things you can do. Do you need to? No, it's totally up to you. Again, you might just do a logical drawing where it's a flat drawing and you're bringing data in. One of the important aspects when you're doing network documentation is what information do I need to bring in? I mean, it's great to know relationships between things. I mean, that's usually the primary thing you're trying to do, or one of the things you're trying to do. But I may want some information about the object. So if I'm discovering a switch or a router, I might want to know its IP address, manufacturer, model, and maybe some other data fields too. So you want to be able to capture data about the objects. And that's just an example here where I've got data fields. And these fields are things in our tool you can manage yourself. You can add more, change them, delete them. We don't really limit you on the number of fields, things like that. I mean, and again, hierarchy. So you can build hierarchies if you want to or need to. Do you need to? No. Again, you could start at a top level. In fact, when you're doing discovery, typically discovery is, especially initial discovery, is going to be, it's more of a flat drawing where you've got to show relationships between things. So again, going back to network documentation, I mean, discovery is great, and it can solve some problems and issues. But if you really need to show true physical connections, showing things like patch panels and other equipment, those are things you're not going to discover unless you're using like a smart patch panel, which my experience has been not a lot of people have things like smart patch panels out there. So, discovering devices is one thing because it's gonna have an IP address. It's active. Typically, it's got SNMP or other capabilities built into it. So, but when you are deciding, okay, these are the drawings I need to do to solve the issue or problem that I'm having, you need to look at how do we bring data into the system. And we're having this conversation here because you want to talk about obviously some sort of automation, which is great. But I'll just talk about kind of the different ways you might bring data into an environment. One of those is just, I'm going to drag and drop an object, and like you might do in Visio. A lot of you guys are Visio users. And then from there, I might drag and drop more things, whether it's a network object or a router or whatever, and then start to connect things together, right? So that's typical. Hey, I'm going to build this out manually. Another way you might bring in data is something like Excel. You've got data in Excel spreadsheets. A lot of you said you have spreadsheets. So you could take that data and we have a format you follow and you basically import it. And then you also may have data in other systems. So for instance, you may have data in, like a BMC type system or HP or SolarWinds or, Logic Monitor or whatever it is. Doesn't really matter to us, but we have the means of also bringing that data over. So if you're already doing discovery, and the reason I bring this up is a lot of people don't realize, hey, I have a tool, it's doing some SNMP gathering or other gathering of data. How do I take advantage of that? Well, you don't necessarily need another discovery tool, namely ours, discovering the data if it's already somewhere. So we can leverage the data through what we call our integration toolkit. And if you're interested in any of that stuff, we can certainly give you a presentation on that or send you some data or details about it and how that works. So, you have different ways of bringing data into our system and other systems that are out there. So anything from manual to spreadsheets to leveraging data you have. But then what about discovery? How do we go about bringing in data from other systems? So from that standpoint, if you want to discover a network, let's say you're going to do work for a new customer, and you've been hired to maybe document their network or do some work on their network, but you don't know what they have and they don't know what they have. How do you go about discovering that network? Well, there's a few different ways that are pretty traditional. One of those is, of course, is SNMP. I won't say of course, but SNMP. But even before SNMP, you might do something like, oh, I'm going to do a discovery just based around simple ping. I'm going to ping objects. What's on my network? Does it respond? I mean, it doesn't mean it's on or not on. It just may mean it doesn't respond. But that can give you some data. That can give you information. So you might want to leverage that. And I'm going to bring over my little discovery console so you can kind of see it. And the reason I'm talking about some of these things is, one, because that's kind of how we handle discovery through these different mechanisms. So something like pinging objects. I want to do a scan of a network or all my networks. Let me see what results I get. And then we take those results, that data, and then we bring it into the tool, the net-terrain tool. But the other thing on top of that would be the next step, besides just pinging and seeing what's alive, is SNMP. And it's pretty traditional. It's been around a long time. There's different SNMP versions. We support the different versions that are out there, and then it can collect and bring in data as well. So typically, you go through a process of discovery data, and then you can go in and sort of preview data that is discovered, the SNMP information. So the process is, hey, let's go out, set up an IP address range, let's discover information and see what we have, see what it finds, and then have it start to draw things out. Now, of course, if you're going to take advantage of SNMP, you have to have SNMP turned on and know the information, know the credentials, the community strings, and other things like that when you do a discovery. So we try and gather SNMP data, do CDP, LLDP, and some other things to figure out the linking and other connections. And discovery is basically pressing a button and it goes through and starts to discover information about the system. And then the system, in our case, the data is going to get sent to the net-terrain server. I'm manually starting this process and implementing the process, but you can have it go out and do this automatically. So you start to look at, if I have data, can I leverage it? If I don't, do I have SNMP turned on? Or can I use SNMP on my devices? Or can I use other things? Other things being, again, something simple like ping. We also are building in some Nmap data as well, so you can have it do an Nmap and bring in data using some of the Nmap information. And we're adding other things too. But this, when we're talking about discovery, this is kind of the base way we're going out and doing our network discovery. And again, the point of all this is to try and automate in some way the process of what you're doing. So I'm just switching servers because my data is getting sent to a different server here. And if you give it a second, so this is the data that's discovered. And I think if I did this right, you'll see in this diagram, it's basically everything's at the top and it's doing this thing called energy and processing. That's just some, I don't know why we called it that, but it's kind of cool to watch. And basically it takes the data and then it starts to build out connections and gives you information about what the connectivity and other things. Now, this isn't necessarily super pretty or anything, but it's doing that, certainly the major weightlifting of, let me discover my devices, let me discover the connectivity, and let me place it on a map and try and disperse the drawing some. Once you have done a discovery with our tool, you can certainly enhance it more. You can come in here and move objects around. You can choose to add more data. You can choose to change things like page sizes, add print templates and drawing templates. But from the standpoint of, hey, I just want to kind of show you guys from a standpoint of, if you are doing discovery, what sort of the process you follow, or kind of what to expect if you're using a tool, in our case, ours, how this gets set up. These icons, you're like, well, they're just generic looking boxes. Yes, they are, but they can actually be, and typically they're going to be manufacturer specific, or they're going to be logical icons. I'm just having it do it just sort of, just basic shapes in this particular instance. That's just how I chose to set it up. But typically you go to discovery and then you're going to take the information and start to do different things with it. After it does a discovery, if you do start to kind of lay things out, the objects will stay where they are. And also, the discovery mechanism will continually update the information and data in the system. So, I mean, ultimately, you're probably going to do a discovery, but again, create, drawings that are a little more, a little nicer to look at, where you've got titles and, maybe you have background images and other things. But, for us, that's kind of our process. But when you are looking at a tool, you definitely need to look at from the standpoint of, hey, how do you guys do your discovery? No matter who this is it SNMP? Are there other things we can bring in data from and take advantage of? Can we take advantage of data that we already have and bring that information as well? And we're primarily really web-based from a user standpoint. There's some things that can happen on the back-end database too, or within the server itself, there's some tools that are, but day-to-day users, they're really using the web interface. So it's just a browser, you log in, user password, we control users, different roles and things like that, and so on. So with that said, I'm sort of out of time here, maybe 5 minutes, and I'll just see if there's any questions. And if there are, then by all means, you can post those now, and I'll try and actually see if there's any questions. I'll give you guys a minute if you want to put some questions into the system here. Can you discover down to port level as well? Yeah, we do have a mechanism for going down to port level. So you can do port to port or show port to port connections. We're actually enhancing that now with our next release. We're enhancing the port to port discovery mechanism. So that'll be, what I showed you was really device to device, but you will be able to do some more port to port type connections, so that you're getting the physical path to a certain extent. I mean, again, if you've got things like patch panels in between, of course, it's not going to show those, but no system really would. So from that standpoint, another question. Oh boy, this. Let me see if I can expand my little question box here. Sorry, give me 1 second here. Oh, here we go. That's better. So that's a good question. So we have with NetTerrain, we actually you have the option of purchasing our software and bringing it in-house. And so if you purchase it and it's in-house, of course, you can do discovery of anything in your network and so on. But we also have a SaaS platform, and the question was, can we discover with the SaaS platform? And the answer is that is what we're planning on being able to allow users to do. We will support that in the near future, very near future, in fact. So that is the plan. Currently, it does not support that. But if you needed to test that functionality, you wanted to see it, I can arrange that if you needed to check that out. You'd have to just call us, and we can talk to you about what your needs are. So yeah, that will happen. Can you discover any vendor equipment that has SNMP? Yeah, SNMP is a standard. Of course, manufacturers have their own proprietary MIBs and sort of data that can be pulled out, but we can actually help in those cases too. But out of the box, you're going to get all your standard SNMP data and information, and then you can add more stuff as you go. In fact, again, I did my discovery and I was just showing sort of generic devices with a generic rectangle. Really, when we do a discovery, you're not just getting generic things, but you can get manufacturer specific. It can look exactly like the switch it discovered. We base that around basically the SNMP OID information for the device types. So that's pretty cool too. Fiber network, it's all about the devices and the SNMP devices and things that are out there that are discoverable, so to speak. So that's a good question. I don't think we care whether it's fiber or not, as long as it's got the SNMP data and it's got some information about how things are connected. But if you want more details, and also I'll add this too, if there's any of you that want to try something out, we're always happy to accommodate. Of course, we got to talk to you and see what your requirements are. Just make sure, one, we can do it today and see if it's a right fit right now, because it may not be. So I kind of spoke to this question, was it cloud-based or on-prem? So you can do either. On-prem, you get a little more functionality and features just because you are hosting it yourself. So we have other options. It doesn't mean you need all those options, but I'm just throwing that out there. But the future will be for discovery, SaaS or on-prem. You'll be able to do either. That's kind of your call. Still need to map and design a network manually. Well, So that's a good question. Is it just a discovery tool? Well, it discovers it and it'll place objects, on the map kind of wherever they are. Now I can build hierarchies and it can actually position things too with Latin long and custom XY or from the standpoint of hierarchy, if you know the location of the object, you can actually place the object in the location. But from the standpoint of outside of that, I mean, my experience has been 90% of the people that do a discovery that I've dealt with, helped, or so on, they do not have information in their equipment that is up to date about location, or it's not even populated. So in that case, there's not much I can do as far as kind of placing things outside of that. So have you imported devices from Cisco, ICE, or Prime? We've done integrations with Prime and other Cisco tools and really any tools. So that's outside of discovery per se. I won't call that a discovery. I'll call that more of an integration. So we do those types of things all the time. We've been doing that for a long time, actually. Is there any main difference between your tool and SolarWinds discovery? Well, I think you'd have to make that determination. I mean, SolarWinds, we have a lot of customers that use SolarWinds, and they'll use our net terrain as a way of displaying the SolarWinds data, because SolarWinds is great as far as doing discovery and other things, but they're a little limited on a few things, and one of those is sort of the certainly the views. But that's case by case. Some people will like to use our tool with SolarWinds, and sometimes SolarWinds is enough for what people have. So I think that just depends on your requirements. System requirements is the other question. We're Windows, so obviously if you're doing SaaS, I don't know if it really matters, except for the standpoint you need a browser that's somewhat modern. If you're on-premise hosting, that you would require a Windows machine. We would tell you if it's if you're doing an instance a lot of people are going to use, it's a Windows server, and SQL Server would be the backend database. So if you don't have SQL, you can use SQL Express to start with, or forever. It depends on the environment and how big of an instance you're trying to install. I mean, if you're a large telecom company or something, and you got hundreds of users, SQL Express isn't going to work. So I think that was it on the questions. I don't see any others. So thanks everybody for your time. Kind of went over by a minute. Sorry about that. If you need anything from us, questions, you want to see a more detailed demo, you want to test things out at some point, we're happy to accommodate that and kind of go from there. So thanks again, and appreciate your time.